Welcome to Safety First with Danger Tate. Welcome to Safety First with Danger Tate. I'm Tate, and this is my interview series where I talk to cool people about the cool things that they do. Our guest today is one of the most, if not the most, knowledgeable person on safety in whitewater. He's written over 15 books on the subject and reported on whitewater accidents and near misses for American Whitewater for 40 years. He helped develop the throwback, and he coined the term foot entrapment. He's a true legend in the sport. Our guest today is Charlie Walbridge. Here, let me bring him to the stage. Hey, Charlie.
Hi there.
How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Everything's working now.
I know. Charlie and I had an excellent bonding experience before this where we got to figure out all of our technical difficulties. And I really feel like we conquered everything.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it worked out.
I am as well. Well, Charlie, what I'm really excited for today is I feel like there's this saying in life where ignorance is bliss. And I feel like you've really kind of flipped the coin on that. And for you, you've been able to learn about all of kind of the things that have gone wrong in whitewater kind of throughout the country and how, and so what I'm curious about with that is, how has knowing more impacted your boating career for the better and for the worse? And just to give a little context as to why I find this so interesting is, I boat pretty much every day. I live in Washington, and being on the river is my favorite thing in the whole world. And I feel like I am a little bit in that ignorance is bliss stage, and I'm almost scared to know more. And so what I'm hoping is by talking to you, me and all of the listeners will be able to understand why knowing more is better. And the other thing I'm excited about is this is a live stream. And so if any of the listeners have any questions, I was thinking they could comment them. And then at the end, we'll do a little Q&A if that works for you.
Sure.
Okay, great. So yeah, if you want to just kind of talk about the moment you knew, okay, I don't want to not know anymore. I want to be safely sound, if that makes sense.
Well, I've always been cautious. When I was younger, I was a hiking leader in New Hampshire for a summer camp, and when you're responsible for a bunch of kids, you're definitely thinking about what you should and shouldn't do. And there was a lot of information out there, and I certainly carried that over into paddling. And when I started paddling, I got a hold of the American Whitewater Safety Code, and there was an excellent book called the Whitewater Handbook, which I read, and so I was very aware of what I should do and shouldn't do to try and be safe. But I certainly didn't know everything, and we all don't know everything. And what started me writing accident reports was I was at a Class 2 slalom race, and there was a foot entrapment. And of course, we didn't know it was a foot entrapment then. And I'm thinking, my goodness, this guy, he's there for a mellow Class 2 slalom event, and he's got all the right gear, he's experienced, and yet he got killed. And that really shook me up, and I wanted to know more, and that's really what started the journey.
And when you started to learn more, did it freak you out, or did it empower you to paddle more? How did that affect you?
Well, I've always been curious, and as I said, I came from a mountain leadership background, so I was used to learning things and following procedures to stay out of trouble. But people vary so much. There are some people you can tell the most horrible stories to, and they're not the least bit affected. And there are other people, my wife can't proofread my accident reports because it gives her nightmares. And she's not the only person who said that. But I think most people are kind of in the middle where learning more is helpful because they know, okay, I shouldn't do this thing. Or I should do this, and they feel better because of it.
So when you go boating now, how much are you getting on the water these days?
Well, Right now it's winter, not too much. And in the last few years, I've really cut back. I've had some injuries and health issues, but I try to get out pretty regularly. But I'm also not doing the stuff I used to do.
Well,
Uh,
and yeah, to dive back kind of into your whitewater career a bit, I know you were really big into C1ing and slalom racing and stuff like that. What's the craft that you take the most now?
Now I'm sort of bouncing between an open canoe and a small raft,
Cool.
uh, two person two person cataract. We call it shredder.
Oh, I know a shredder.
Yeah,
I know a shredder. Amazing.
that's what I use for the harder stuff, and for the easier stuff, I still open canoe. I can't really fit in my C1 comfortably anymore.
Was a C1 ever comfortable? That's my question. I've
Oh
never
yeah,
done one. They
oh
are.
yeah. You know, I could. There was a time when I could paddle a C1 for 8 hours straight and maybe take one break for lunch. But those days are over. You know, I occasionally run into somebody who was able to paddle C1 into their 80s and even 90s, but
Uh-huh.
that's pretty unusual.
And your main career has been on the East Coast, right?
Yes,
Yeah. Have you ventured west much?
I've been out west. I did. I went out to California and boated some stuff out there. Not the really hard stuff.
Mhm.
I took some trips on the easier hard stuff and figured that I really didn't need any more of that. And
Nice.
I've been in Oregon and Washington for short trips, and
Okay, cool.
you know, run the Rogue River and the Salmon. When I was younger, I also did some week-long trips to Idaho. But the group that I went out with, unfortunately, was usually a bit sportier than I was.
Okay.
They were North Fork of the Payette people,
Mhm.
and so, I got to see a good bit of the stuff in Idaho, and I did many years ago a week in Colorado.
Oh, nice.
So you know, I know what's out west, but I don't know it as well
It's east.
as I know the east.
Well, it's been fun.
If somebody sends an accident report to me on an eastern river, chances are that's a river that I know, or at least know of. But out
Mhm.
west, I often need help orienting myself.
So, with the accident reports, how does that exactly work? People
Well,
send you in things or what?
the way it works is that I get the information any way I can. Sometimes it's a newspaper article, and for people outside the paddling community, that's the way it usually comes in. And the articles vary tremendously in terms of how how good they are. I mean, I've gotten some articles that are unusable because I can't tell. Sometimes I can't tell what boat is being used or what the section of river is. But usually, I can take something like that and then make some inquiries and find some people who know more. Now, when you've got somebody who is in the paddling community, and I encourage people to talk about what happened because that's how we learn. There are two types of people. There are the people who talk a lot. That's me, and there are people who are really don't want to talk about it. And most of the time, I'm able to get some information from people. Sometimes it's secondhand, um, and enough to put together two or three sentences that explain what happened.
Mhm.
Sometimes you get somebody who writes a really in-depth report, and that's very helpful.
What are the key pieces of information that you're looking for?
Well, certainly, certainly after if it's a fatality, the name of the person who died, and that's because sometimes in a busy summer season you'll have two or three fatalities on the same river,
Mm.
and it's a way of keeping them apart. And I think it also makes it more real.
Mhm.
Then you're talking about the date, the location, um, then a description of where it happened, and then just a straightforward narrative.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be anything long, although some people write really lengthy things.
Mm-hmm.
They'll explain what the day was like, what the group was like, how they got into it, all about the rescue and the
Mm-hmm.
evacuation. And again, that's really useful.
And throughout your career, you've taught a lot of swiftwater, right? Swiftwater
I
rescues.
taught until about 5 years ago. I've had knee injury that really has
Mm.
hurt my mobility, and that you can't lead a class effectively without really good mobility and a high energy level. But I taught the class from until probably starting in 19 1989 or 87, somewhere in there, because
Do you,
I was doing like a whitewater self-defense class where you went swimming and wading and threw throw bags, and it gradually evolved into something more.
Speaking of the throwback, I know that you were pretty pivotal in like developing its like modern design. Can you
Well,
talk kind of through that process?
what happened was I was in the American Canoe Association canoe and kayak instruction program, and at the time we were working with the Red Cross because they had a national instruction program, and we were helping them develop their course. And there was the Red Cross contact was a man named Ray Miller, and Ray sent a drawing of the throw bag and a description. And I came from a background of boating and guiding out on the Youghiogheny and the Cheat, and the guides there were very minimalist. If something went wrong, they often just swam out and dealt with it. They didn't use ropes much. We would carry a rope, but a coiled rope, it'd take you quite a bit of time to uncoil the rope and throw it a few times to work the kinks out.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray described this thing, and my first reaction was, "Oh, this is a gimmick." But I made one out of a backpacking stuff bag and a rope and some foam, and I threw it off of my front porch, and I said, "Whoa, this is really amazing." And I just made some small modifications to it. The idea has been around forever. Ray said he got the picture and information from some U.S. Navy information. It was standard equipment on their lifeboats. But I've talked to some people in the marine world, and they say it's been around forever.
Okay.
But what I did is I took the bag, I put a press lock on the drawstring, and really promoted it through. I had a mail order catalog at the time, and I also worked on some magazine articles, and those things really helped get the word out. And it was just a really good idea.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are many people who make these bags and a lot of different designs. I've tried a number of them, but I like the old one better. Most of the people make the bags too small, and they're harder to restuff.
Uh-huh. With instructing and kind of being, in the know for all of the safety things, what are some pivotal moments for new gear or, new inventions?
Well, certainly one pivotal moment would be 1977 when the first Coast Guard Type 3 life jacket was put out. And you have to understand that the Coast Guard approved life jackets like the Mae West and the Horse Collar. They were useful in a marine environment, but they really didn't work for active sportsmen. And I'm talking about not only whitewater paddling, but also things like sailing small boats the Coast Guard was not very open to it. And there was a man named Maurice Link who I met at a conference, and he ran Stearns Manufacturing, and he told the Coast Guard that they needed to have a wearable jacket, something that people wanted to wear, rather than something that was under the seat. You just put it on when you thought the boat was going to crash, which is rather hard to do when the boat is in the process of crashing.
Yeah.
And so what he said was, if you guys don't want to approve it, I'm going to make some unapproved jackets. And in fact, he made unapproved jackets. And Coast Guard realized that they were going to lose control of the process, and that's when the Type 3 came into play. And certainly another one would have been in the early, I think it was 1979. There was a guide killed on a rafting trip run by the Nantahala Outdoor Center on Section 4 of the Chattooga in a rapid called Jawbone. And Slim Ray and Les Becknell were there. And NOC at that time was the premier Eastern outfitter and probably one of the best in the country. And they could not rescue this guy. So over the winter, they got together and they developed some techniques, and it eventually got put into Slim Ray's book River Rescue. And about this time, there was a man, Jim Segerstrom, in California. Segerstrom was a guide who had a lot of contacts in the first responder community in California, which is very strong. It's always been well funded. Like in California, if you have a serious river accident, if you call out, you will get a helicopter coming in. And I'll tell you, you don't get that in West Virginia where I live. You'll get a bunch of overweight firefighters bushwhacking their way through the woods. So Jim developed a swiftwater training program, and I really liked his because Les and Slim came from a rock climbing background, and theirs was very rope intensive. And ropes are cool, but they're also time consuming. And I came from the Occoganey, where, as I said, guides tended to swim to where the trouble was and deal with it. And I had taken Slim and Les's course and said, well, this is very interesting. But then I went out and took a course with Jim Segerstrom, and it's like, holy moly, these guys are good. They not only like to be in the water, which is what I like, but they can really deal with the water. A couple of their instructors were Navy SEALs, and I was a pretty good river swimmer back then. This is back when I'm in my mid-30s, and these guys could outswim me easily. So that was a major thing, and it's also been very helpful because I did some classes for people in the first responders, but they always I'd be doing my presentation, and a lot of them would kind of been giving me the side eye because, hey, the only paddlers they'd ever met were the ones they pulled off a creek somewhere. And
okay.
I wasn't really part of their community, but Segerstrom was, and he really helped do that. And of course, the other thing that happened is we had, in this 80s time, two very important people, Pam Dillon in Ohio and Virgil Chambers in Pennsylvania. They both developed swiftwater training courses for first responders. And when Ohio was the leader, and when this starts being taught in the fire academy, all of a sudden it's not just some crazy paddler talking to them. This is another skill set like confined space or vertical or whatever. And the rescue ability of people in the first response community is just much, much stronger. It used to be that, I'd get 5, 6, 8 reports of fatalities among firefighters attempting swiftwater rescues. And that's really bad because, these guys are very clued in to their communities, and it's really bad for the paddling community when somebody dies because the community blames the paddler when really
Yeah.
it's a lack of training. And I know because I've talked to people in communities trying to encourage them to train, and
Hmm.
it has not been well received. Some
When
20 something guy with 2 kids is dead,
mm,
and he was going after some dumb paddler. That really hurts us as a sport.
when you're encouraging people to train, what are simple ways that people can train in just like their everyday paddling life aside from a course?
Well, if you're talking about paddlers,
Yeah, let's talk about
now
paddlers.
in the first response community, there are good training programs out there, a lot of them, and I encourage them to go there. And now there's a path there, so we're not running symposiums and trying to jolly people into thinking about it. It's very mainstream now with paddlers. The best thing you can do is take a swiftwater rescue course.
Yeah.
You can learn in 2 days stuff that took us decades to learn.
Wow.
And when Wayne Sunmacher and I developed the ACA course, we tried a lot of different things. We learned that there were some things that you can teach pretty well, and some things which are much harder to teach.
Like what?
And well, certainly anything to do with ropes is much harder to learn. And when I've been teaching ropes, I've been looking for ways to simplify things, because it will take you probably an hour or more to go over a Z drag, which is one of the rope skills that I really believe is useful. And it can take an hour or two in your class, and you can go years without using a Z drag.
Yeah.
I would have to think way back before using a Z drag. Where teaching someone how to swim, how to wade, how to use a throw bag, I can do those 3 things in the morning,
Hmm.
and people pick them up, they remember it, and the thing that I've really been impressed with is it really increases their confidence,
Mm.
because now it's like, well, if I get out of the water, I can deal with it. If one of my buddies gets a boat stuck, I can deal with it, and that's really been exciting to see ordinary paddlers just feel more confident and better able to handle the sort of routine things that happen on a river.
Well, I think one of my favorite parts of being on a river, and I just went and did a new river this weekend, and it was cool to be, in a new state. I was in California on the Smith, and it was cool to just scout a new rapid, right? And look and be like, oh, there's a hole. I probably don't want to go in there. And yet I find the ability to like be calm in water so, I don't know. I feel so lucky that I'm comfortable in water. And so what I love about the Swiftwater courses and when I'm teaching people how to row for the first time is watching their confidence grow, just like you said, and watching them figure out, okay, there are things that I can do to feel more comfortable here. With all of the accidents that you've studied, I've noticed as I've looked at the database, a lot of them are listed as flush drownings. Can you describe what a flush drowning actually is? Because I think it's kind of a mystery for some.
Well, flush drowning is drowning that occurs when somebody is wearing a life jacket and they're just getting pummeled by the river.
Uh-huh.
Where I see a lot of them is on the Arkansas River in Colorado, which has a short season. It has a high water season. There are an awful lot of people on solo or one boat trips.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you've got a regular raft trip, you flip a boat with 6 people into fast moving water, it's easy for one of them just to sort of slip by.
Yeah.
And obviously these things are different. Sometimes it's somebody paddling solo, sometimes it's somebody with a group, but all in one boat. So when the boat flips, they have no safety backup. Sometimes it's somebody just in a really nasty rapid who there was a drowning of a very good boater last year in Pine Creek Canyon on the Arkansas, and he was with a good group, and he just took a longer swim than he needed to, and it wasn't the group's fault. It was high water, and he really got pummeled.
When you're looking at accident reports and then deciding for yourself when you go boating or throughout your boating career, what are the things that, were a hard no for you? Was it high water? Was it amount of people? Or what were those kind of things like when you were decision making?
It's just, it's all of the things that are there. Like, for instance, I would never say no to solo boating always, but if I were paddling by myself, it'd be like, okay, if I'm going solo, my gear has got to be right. It's got to be really good in terms of weather and water. And the river has to be well within my skill level. Mm-hmm. Even then, I'm not completely comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And, the harder the run, you're just juggling more things. And certainly when I was younger and doing some stuff, we pushed the edges a little bit. And people are going to do that. They'll know that they're strong in some areas and not in others. The one reason that I think we stayed out of trouble is the people I boated with tended to be slalom paddlers, and we all had a lot of river time and a lot of boat control, and that kept us out of trouble.
Yeah. With boating with a large group, it's kind of been a topic for me lately, just because there are so many fun people to paddle with here, that it's hard for me not to turn a lap into a total party lap with 10, 15 boats. But what are ways to keep safety on the forefront with a large group?
The easiest way, if you have to boat with a large group, is that each person pairs off with somebody. And it's like, okay, we're going to watch out for each other, because if you've got 14 people, say, you're not going to be counting their number all the time.
Yeah.
Where if you've got a group of 4, if somebody's missing, you know it immediately. So the best way to get around it is you just get somebody and say, hey, let's look out for each other.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good pro tip. Thank you. Okay, pivoting a little bit, I am curious about, with the East Coast and all of the rivers that are nearby, what were your favorite ones to paddle? What was like your favorite go-to day stretch?
Well, I've I always loved the rivers right around the northern West Virginia and western Pennsylvania. These eventually lured me out there, and eventually moved to Brewston Mills, which is in northern West Virginia, very close to the Big Sandy, which is my favorite river, okay, and the Upper Youghiogheny, which is a favorite, and the Cheat Canyon and the Lower Yacht, and then moving a little bit further afield. There are just many rivers in that area, and unlike the West, they're close by.
Yeah.
If I were to leave my house and drive from Brewston Mills to Cumberland, which is a drive of about an hour, I'd be crossing probably 10, 15 rivers. Where out west, sometimes you drive 3 or 4 hours between a river.
Wow. I'm so excited. I'm going to go to the Gauley this fall for the first time. And so I've been trying to gather all of the rivers that I should run while I'm over there. I can't wait.
It's fall and there's not a lot of stuff going then.
Okay, that's a good point. That is a great point.
You'll want to, in the immediate area, there's the New River, but the New tends to be low at that time of year.
Okay.
It's still worth a look. A lot of the people who run the Gauley go up to run the Upper Yacht.
Uh-huh.
And there's a week right before Gauley Festival where the river runs every day. And assuming that happens, if it's a drought year, it won't happen. But if that happens, there will be, there'll be a lot of people there. And of course, the lower Youghiogheny is in the vicinity. And then it just
Mm-hmm.
depends on what the water does. I mean, you could come and it could rain like hell, and there'd be all kinds of things running.
Okay,
But
fingers crossed.
what's that?
Fingers crossed.
You don't want too much.
That's true.
Because if you get, I remember going down one weekend to the Gauley, and the Gauley is normally 2,500 or 2,800 out of the dam. Well, they had 6,000 out of the dam, 15,000 out of the meadow. So the Gauley was out, the meadow was too high, and we ended up going into the upper Gauley tributaries, the Cherry and the Cranberry, and we finally ended up on this little tiny thing, which we boated a little while and then said, "Hey, this is a little out of control. We better get off of it."
Mm.
And so when you get big rains, which happens, particularly if a hurricane comes up the coast, there's such a thing as too much.
With looking at all the accident reports that you've studied, I know that high water does definitely play a role in accidents that can happen. With running stretches of river, I guess I'm just curious with hiking out. And like in your experience, have you had times that you've had to hike out of a river?
Yeah, I hiked out of the Upper Yacht one time. There's a rapid named after me because of that.
Oh, really? Can you tell the story?
Charlie's Choice. The story's
Oh,
pretty straightforward. It was my first run. I was running with the Demery brothers, who knew the river pretty well,
uh-huh.
and I was not having a good day, and I got through this one rapid, and I popped my skirt, and I was shaking so hard I couldn't put the skirt back on, and I figured that was a good time to get off.
Mm-hmm.
So I told Dave I needed to get off, and he says, "Okay, we'll hike out." And I said, Dave was having a great day. And I said, you guys can continue on without me. And he said, have you looked at my little brother? He's just as scared as you are. He's just not smart enough to say it. We're getting out of here.
I do feel like that kind of brings up a good point is, boating with people who you feel comfortable saying when you're scared, which I think is a cool thing that I've noticed as I've kind of come up in the river world. The ability to say, hey, I'm not really comfortable, or hey, I'd really like to scout has been much more well received. Is that a trend you've noticed?
Well, certainly with the people I boat, we watch after each other. And, the other thing about being an older boater is you don't have something to prove.
Mm.
You've already, you're already on the downward slide, and you boat with people like that. They're very watchful and respectful of each other. You get some younger groups. There's a lot of sort of swashbuckling and posturing going on, and you also see some people taking people down the river who aren't showing due care, and who are getting them trashed, and they sort of think it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
And you find groups that you're not comfortable with, just as you find groups you are comfortable with.
Do you have any tips for showing someone new down a stretch of river?
Well, assuming that you know it well, I'm not running the Upper Yacht anymore except in a raft, but back in the day, I knew where the lines were. I knew the places to stop. I knew where to set people up and suggest that they run, and I would lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked out a lot better than my first complete run. I was running with a fellow named Jack Wright, and we all went down with Jack because Jack was experienced. Jack knew the river. Well, he knew the river sort of. He would come down to a bottom of rapid that we'd sort of flailed and run our way down, and we'd eddy out, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, I remember that one."
Oh my gosh. Well, that makes me think like one of the first times I did a run out here, I remember I was following someone and he was basically like, okay, so I kind of know the lines, but basically if you see me getting beat down, don't go there. I said, okay, perfect. But I think that's a really good pro tip of just like, okay, you have to actually know the lines, watch out for them, know where to stop, and focus on that. I also think when I've showed people down lines, I kind of have to realize that the lap isn't about me. It's
And
not
it's
about me like doing all the tricks or splatting rocks or anything like that. It's like, oh no, I'm here to like support them.
yeah, and you certainly get people who don't don't know that, and people get into trouble following them.
Yeah.
There are people who have a really good reputation for taking people down the river, and other people you say, I'm not sure you want to go down with that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, to pivot a little bit into kind of the world now, is alcohol and substances have kind of been a part of river culture for as long as river culture has been a thing. And I feel like there is a shift, or as we've studied accident reports more, alcohol is in some of the accident reports. But what are your thoughts on, substances with the river?
Well, certainly, if you're running a river, I wouldn't I wouldn't be doing any alcohol or drugs. It's hard to know how much that's there because in the aftermath, people often don't talk about it.
Right.
And if it's if it's something if it's something there, if they don't recover the person quickly, there are some chemical processes that go on in a body after you die that make it impossible to get good readings of alcohol and drugs. I mean, who knows? You certainly see people doing it, and there's certainly people who go through parts of their life where they do drugs a lot on the river, but usually as they get older, they stop doing that, usually after they scare themselves.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I just think it's important for people to hear, and that it
Yeah,
does impact boating.
yeah, it's just something I don't have a really good number on because
Yeah.
even and one of the things is I don't get a hold of government reports typically because if you ask for them, they're so slow and there's so many restrictions on them that it's just better to use news articles or people in the community.
Hmm.
But you know, even when the government investigates, they don't always do autopsies. They don't always do drug tests.
Hmm.
A lot of times it's like, okay, we got somebody dead. Let's just get the story, sign the witnesses up.
Hmm.
I was in Idaho. We lost a guy on the Clearwater, and after we got him out, and we contacted the local authorities, and the sheriff just said, "Well, that's the third one this year, boys." Now it wasn't paddlers; it was fishermen who had drowned there,
Okay.
and they just weren't that interested. Now some states like particularly Pennsylvania and Ohio, and generally throughout the mid states of New England, you will get people who will talk to you about it, but they just want to get the story. There's no foul play here. Just
Hmm.
get the paperwork done and move on to the next thing.
Mm. You spent a lot of time on the American Whitewater Board of Directors, right?
Yeah.
Are there any projects that you were a part of that you're really proud that got accomplished?
Well, there was a lot it was the time when American Whitewater transitioned from being this newsletter club to a real conservation and access force. But that wasn't me. That was Pete Skinner.
Mm.
Pete, Pete. I was working with the American Canoe Association at the time, and Pete asked me to come on the board. And I found out that he had taken over the organization when essentially it had almost collapsed because it was run entirely by volunteers. And in the late 70s, women entered the workforce in large numbers. And the upshot was that a lot of organizations were starved for volunteers because all of a sudden these people who were holding organizations together were working for a salary.
Uh-huh.
And Pete got a hold finally when he was on the board. He became president. He got a hold of the essentially the box that had all the organization's information. No renewal notices had been sent out. The organization was dying. He flew out to California. he asked Yvonne Chenard to give AW $10,000, which he used to get it back on its feet, to send out renewal notices, to publish a couple of journals. And I came on the board at about this time, after he had kind of gotten past the first stage. And I remember we were doing a meeting. It was up along the Esopus Creek in upstate New York, and we were doing strategic planning. And Pete gets up and he says, there are going to be over 400 dams relicensed in the next 10 years, and we ought to be looking at all of these. And if there is whitewater, we ought to get some. And that was Peter. I mean, if you meet him, he's still just a very energetic, fired up guy. And he's the one who really was a force behind relicensing. He brought in Pope Barrow and Steve Taylor, who had worked together with Citizens for Gauley River, which was another organization that I was part of. But because I had a mail order business, I was mostly doing fundraising.
Okay.
And those guys really, fought a dam that would have drastically changed the Gauley. And it was really quite remarkable how they did it. Because the Corps of Engineers was pretty powerful back then. We didn't really know how to stop them. But Steve Taylor, of course, came from NASA, and he's a hydrologist. And Pope Barrow was an attorney. So the two of them really were very effective. And then they just moved over to American Whitewater and helped Pete with the initial projects. And then Pete realized that this was something that couldn't be carried by volunteers all the time. So we hired our first executive director, which was Rich Bowers. And it's gone on from there.
It's really cool to hear kind of the history of the evolution. I guess that's the same thing, but it's cool to hear because I think I've heard different names thrown around, or, I enjoy whitewater so much now, but I wouldn't be able to do it without all of the hard work that you and all of those people put forward. So thank you for making the whitewater world so amazing.
Well, I was sort of a backbencher because I was doing the safety stuff.
I mean, but that's even more, that's so vital, right? Like,
more recently, I've worked on some access projects near my home, but I'm not a confrontational guy like Pete Skinner is. but more of what I did was going to town council in Friendsville, working with them on some conflicts. There was one key person in town council, Jess Whittemore, who had a vision for access and parking. And I worked with Jess, helped him fundraise. Jess took the lead when there was a relicensing going on. And we got a lot of help from American Whitewater, particularly from Adam Kramer, who was on the board at the time and who now is the executive director of the Outdoor Alliance. But
Okay.
Adam was absolutely vital, not only in keeping everybody on the same page, because we had both commercial and private people. We had people from the college, from Garrett Community College, which has a really good outdoor program. And we had some local folks who weren't paddlers, but who were interested in making things work. And so Adam kept everybody on the same page. And it's kind of an interesting story because the locals were kind of nervous about AW.
In what ways?
They just didn't know what they were about. And so finally I get Kevin Coburn, who is still with us. I mean, this happened 20 years ago. He's still with us, but Kevin comes up after the Gauley Fest and meets with the locals. And I mean, all the heavies are there. Roger Zabel, Jess Whittemore, Johnny Regan, Jim Field, we're all there. And Kevin gets up, and I mean, he's young then. He's, like in his early 20s, and he's just saying, I remember coming here as a high school kid, and I'd look over there and say, oh, somebody would say, oh, there's Roger Zabel. Oh, there's Johnny Regan. Oh, there's Jimmy Snyder. And he said, now we're going to get together and do something really cool for the river. And he's trying to get these guys to talk about it. And they're just not engaging. And finally, John Regan pounds on the table and says, all right, let's get this out on the open. What does AW want here anyway? And so Kevin just stops a second, and then he looked under the table, came back up, and he says, there's no one else here. I think we're AW. What do you want? And that's how we got all these people together. And I mean, there were two people in that room who had not been in the same room together since they'd gotten into a pushing and shoving match at a party over something to do with the upper yacht race, and their wives had to pull them apart. And they were all working together.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And what's really cool is how this project and the leadership that Jesse and Adam provided brought all these people together. And they just forgot. There were all kinds of sort of petty little quarrels because it was a small town and these are young guys and they were very competitive. But they were all on the same page with this.
Wow.
And when we went to county commission, when we went, I didn't go to Annapolis to the state, but they did. It all came together, and AW was the catalyst.
Yeah, it's really grown into something quite remarkable with all that it
has.
does.
We're pretty scared right now because right now, $400,000 in government grants are up for grabs, thanks to what's going on in Washington. And what's also scary is some of the key people in the agencies who we work with, they're fired. It's going to be a very tough year.
And I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but is there anything that the average person can do? Is there anything that I can do that the listeners can do? What do you think?
I would say, if you're watching what's going on and you don't like it, write your legislators, because I think right now the legislators are not doing their job.
Yeah.
What's going on in terms of these mass firings and these impoundments, which threaten Park Service, Forest Service, all kinds of things. I work on a watershed group, Friends of the Cheat. We're building a bike trail. I don't know where where the money is going to come from, because the thing is, a lot of these things are matching grants.
Yeah.
And if somebody bails, we may lose the whole package. And I mean, we're talking about a package with a total value of several $1 million. So if people are watching this and they don't like it, they should get in touch with their Congress people and tell them that they need to take steps to see that our government infrastructure is not dismantled.
Yeah, that's a really actionable thing. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope that, if you are listening, whoever the listeners are, please write, because it is scary and there are things that need to be done. And, whitewater enthusiasts, outdoor enthusiasts, we need to do something.
If you go to the American Whitewater page, there is a, one of these contact forms you can use to talk specifically about the, American Whitewater's stuff. And I suspect, I'm with various organizations, and we have had there's been a bunch of stuff. It's out there. There's a lot of information there. And I think the only thing that is going to keep things on track is for people to express to their representatives their concerns, because it's easy to talk about big government and how nasty it is, but so much stuff, it just happens, very quietly,
Hmm.
like the river gauges that we depend on. They've laid off a bunch of people in USGS. And how is that going to affect the maintenance of these gauges? How is it going to affect the website?
Wow, good point. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of stuff that the government does that is it's very useful, and it's very quiet, and the people are really hardworking. When I did work with the Coast Guard years ago, helping them on some safety stuff, and they're just a lot of guys. They've been, they're in this job. There's one guy who was a real expert on boat engines, particularly engines that operated in an enclosed space. There was another guy who knew more about life jackets than anybody, and it was particularly interesting because this is when the Type 3 thing was going on.
Mhm.
And he was interested in talking to the paddling community because we were one of the people who routinely used life jackets.
Right.
And the jackets that we used were not approved. They were Harris shocks and Flather shocks, and it wasn't until Coast Guard got their approval process going that companies like Stearns and Extra Sport really started producing good wearable jackets. And these are just, people who come and they do a job for themselves every day. And there is, they're also not making huge amounts of money either.
Yeah. What other organizations are you involved with right now?
Well, right now the two are American Whitewater and Friends of Cheat.
Okay.
I've really dropped back from American Canoe Association because with my injuries, my certifications have lapsed, and I'm not really interested in re-upping them again. The whole process has gotten much more complicated.
Yeah.
And aside from that, I contribute money to various organizations. I work with the West Virginia Land Trust. We're working to protect about 4 miles of riverfront property along the lower Big Sandy River.
That's a lot of projects you've got going on. Thank you for doing all of them. It's amazing.
Well, it's not really that much. But Friends of Cheat has been something that I've been interested in for a long time, and it's an environmental organization, but it's a community organization. We don't come in and sue people and shake our fists. We become part of the community. We work with people in the community, and in West Virginia, that the most important thing is you have to be there for a while.
Yeah.
And Friends of Cheat is celebrating its 30th anniversary. And I can remember
Wow.
the first time I went in to meet with the county commission, you could just tell they were looking at us and saying, "Oh God, the river hippies are here." The last time I went there, they were listening to our director, Amanda Pitzer, and you could tell they respected her. And she had served on some committees with them.
Wow.
So, and that's what you really need to get long-term advances. Because, coming in and suing, that's important sometimes, but a lot can be accomplished cooperatively.
What I really love that you said is, that you have to be a part of the community and you have to find that community. And I do think that for paddling, that is something that is so on the forefront for why I love it is the community aspect. And so what I love about what you've shared today is with safety and with, boating in large groups or reaching out to congressmen or whatever, it's all doing things for the sake of the river and the thing that brings everyone together. So I think that's really beautiful.
That's very well said, because when I look back or when I tell stories, I find myself not telling about rivers particularly, although certain rivers and rapids are definitely a part of the scene. But what I do end up talking about is the different people, how they reacted in different circumstances. What so and so said, what so and so did, what happened to so and so when he did that. And I've met a whole bunch of amazing and diverse people through paddling, and of course, working through doing the safety stuff. I've also had the real pleasure of working with some quite outstanding people in government.
Yeah. Yeah, your ability to remember names has been quite impressive. I will say that. Well, Charlie, I think my last question for you is, if you just have, I don't know, 3 to 5 tips for, based on all of your knowledge, to pay attention to before you go paddling, what would those things be? Just to stay safer.
Well, when you're talking about, there are two groups of people, and when you're talking about the general public, um, whitewater is pretty safe except when it's not. And what I tell people is that the things that you want to do are wear your life jacket, avoid alcohol and drugs, and then avoid extremes of weather and water levels unless you have the skills to deal with it. Because most of the accidents I see involving inexperienced people involve blundering into conditions that they weren't prepared for. And then lastly, to know something about the river. Because there are stories about people putting in right above dams or right above gorges and just getting into horrible trouble because of it. And then, with the skilled folks, they're going to avoid all these problems. They're not going to be out there without a life jacket. They're going to have cold weather protection. They're going to know something about the river. They're going to be paddling in a group, and that's another thing. So many accidents are either solo or one boat trips, and so you'd have to add that on to the general public, and all of these things experienced paddlers are going to avoid. And experienced paddler deaths are a very small number of the total. Like, I usually have about 50 deaths a year reported, and no more than 10 would be people with some experience.
Wow.
Some of them people quite experienced. And, overall boating accidents is over 1,000 a year. And most of them are in motorboats. And so that there's just, you're really starting to narrow it down. And what I tell people is just to be really aware of your skill and your ability, because certainly as I've gotten older, because I'm 76, and in the last 5 or 6 years I have dropped back considerably, but I dropped back before that. I stopped running the upper gully when my roll started becoming less reliable. And it wasn't because I didn't practice; it just wasn't as good a roll. I just wasn't as flexible and wasn't as fit. And so, be aware of what your abilities are, and try to do things that aren't going to get you in trouble.
Wow. Thanks for sharing those. Those are really helpful and very doable. And so I really am appreciative that you took the time to talk to me, and hopefully for listeners, they can take your curiosity and your knowledge and kind of run with it, and that the sport can hopefully consider to grow. And I also really appreciate what you said about writing your legislative representatives, because it is scary, and I just hope that the community can come together.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to take a lot of communities coming together to come out of this at the end.
Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Charlie. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right.